December 18th, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. Two Panzer Brigades need the same road, and neither one can have it until the crossroads town blocking them both is taken. 7 roads, 3 divisions, 1 bottleneck. It will not be cleared, and that failure will cost Germany the last offensive it ever launches in the West. The town of Bastogne sits at the intersection of 7 roads in the Belgian Ardennes. 7 roads, converging on a single point in the high plateau country of the Ardennes, where the ridges and the dense forests and the December mud channel every vehicle, every column, every armored division attempting to move east to west or north to south through the Ardennes into the same limited number of paved routes, whose quality the Belgian road system's rural character makes the decisive military constraint. In the Ardennes, the road is not just the line of advance. The road is the operational lifeline, the route along which the fuel and the ammunition and the replacements must travel to keep the armored column moving. And in the Ardennes, in December 1944, there are very few roads of sufficient quality to bear the weight of the division's tracked and wheeled vehicles, and most of them run through Bastogne. The Belgian highway engineers who built those roads did not build them for war. They built them for the farmers and the merchants of the Ardennes Plateau, for the commerce of a small regional economy whose traffic needs were modest and whose road network reflected those modest needs in the specific and inconvenient way of the rural road that does not accommodate the military vehicle convoy's requirements. The Ardennes roads are narrow, winding, and cut through terrain whose river valleys and forested ridgelines and December weather combine to limit the passable routes to the small number of paved highways whose condition the Belgian road maintenance program has maintained, and whose alignment the military commander must use because the alternatives, the forest tracks, the farm lanes, the unpaved secondary roads, are impassable to the tracked vehicle in December mud and to the wheeled vehicle in any season. In December 1944, the German 5th Panzer Army, under General Hasso von Manteuffel, needs to move 3 armored divisions west toward the Meuse River, at a pace that the Ardennes highway network's limited road capacity barely supports under ideal conditions, and that the winter weather and the American defensive resistance are making considerably less than ideal. The roads through Bastogne are the roads that will take them there: the N12, the N84, the N4, and the subsidiary roads whose connection to the main highway network the Bastogne junction provides. And Bastogne is not cleared. The Ardennes offensive, Operation Wacht am Rhein, Hitler's last strategic gamble in the West, launches on December 16, 1944, with 41 German divisions attacking across an 85-mile front in the Ardennes sector against the thinly held American line of General Troy Middleton's Vice Corps, the sector that Shaef has been treating as a quiet rest and training area, and whose defensive position the 2 inexperienced and 2 exhausted American divisions have been holding with the minimum force that the broad front's allocation of a thinly stretched Allied army permits. The offensive's operational objective is the Meuse River, and beyond the Meuse, the port of Antwerp, whose capture would split the Allied armies along the seam between the British and American commands, and create the conditions for the separate peace negotiation that Hitler's strategic reasoning, increasingly disconnected from the Wehrmacht's actual capacity, projects as the consequence of a decisive German success in the West. The plan requires speed above all else, requires the armored spearheads to move through the American defensive crust before the Allied command can assemble and deploy the reserve that will seal the breach, requires the Meuse crossing to be achieved before the Allied air power can interdict the German lines of communication in the specific and devastating way that clear weather will permit, and requires the entire operation to be executed in the narrow weather window between the onset of the offensive on December 16th and the return of clear skies that will put the Allied tactical air forces, the P-47 Thunderbolts and the P-51 Mustangs, and the medium bombers of the 9th Air Force, back over the battlefield in the interdiction role that the German column's road movement makes catastrophically vulnerable. It requires the armored divisions of the 5th Panzer Army and the 6th Panzer Army to break through the American defensive crust, exploit the gap before the Allied command can assemble the reserves whose deployment will seal it, and reach the Meuse before the American logistical system and the Allied air power can restore the coherence that the initial breakthrough destroys. Speed is everything, and speed requires roads, requires the paved, reliable road whose surface bears the weight of the Panther tank's 45 tons, and the Panzer IV's 25 tons, and the Tiger's 57 tons, and the fuel truck, and the ammunition truck, and the infantry half-track, without becoming the impassable mud channel that the unpaved track becomes in December rain. In the Ardennes in December 1944, there are not enough paved roads to support 3 armored divisions advancing simultaneously, and the ones that exist, the N4, the N12, the N84, the N15, all connect at a single point, and that point is Bastogne. General Hasso von Manteuffel commands the 5th Panzer Army, the central force of the German Ardennes offensive, the army whose operational axis runs through the Schnee-Eifel and St. Vith and Bastogne, and the Ourthe River Valley, toward the Meuse at Namur and Dinant. Von Manteuffel is 47 years old, one of the German army's most decorated and most respected panzer commanders, a man whose small physical stature makes him easily underestimated, and whose battlefield performance makes the underestimation immediately corrected. A career tanker whose operational skill has been demonstrated in the Eastern Front's most demanding armored engagements from Kursk to the Ukraine, whose reputation in the German officer corps is the reputation of the aggressive and professionally capable panzer commander, who extracts the maximum from available resources, and whose professional relationship with Hitler is direct enough that he was able to argue against the Ardennes Plan's operational assumptions in the pre-offensive planning conferences. Von Manteuffel told Hitler the Antwerp objective was too ambitious, told him that the Meuse crossing was achievable, but that Antwerp required conditions that the German army in December 1944 could not produce. He was right. Hitler overruled him and kept the Antwerp objective in the operational plan. Von Manteuffel executed the plan he had argued against with the professional skill of the commander who accepts the decision above him and executes it as well as the available forces permit. He came closer to the Meuse than any other German formation in the offensive, before the Bastogne bottleneck strangled his army's advance. He commands the ex-Levi Panzer Corps under General Heinrich Freiherr von Lüttwitz, a Prussian aristocrat and career cavalry officer turned panzer commander, whose specific and documented personality combines the aggressive operational instinct of the Panzer Arm with the institutional impatience of the German aristocratic officer who expects his orders to be executed and his timeline to be met. Von Lüttwitz is the corps commander who will issue the surrender demand to Bastogne on December 22nd, who will send his officers under the white flag with the formal document whose rejection McAuliffe will answer with the single word that becomes the most famous response in the American Army's history. He issues the demand because he needs the road and he cannot get it any other way. The corps whose 2nd Panzer Division under Colonel Meinrad von Laukert, the Panzer Lehr Division under General Fritz Bayerlein, and the 26th Volksgrenadier Division under General Heinz Kokott are the formations tasked with executing the offensive's central axis through the Schnee-Eifel and the Aar River crossings and the Ardennes Plateau and the Aar River Valley toward the Meuse. These are 3 good formations by the Wehrmacht's December 1944 standards that reflect 2 years of attrition on the Eastern Front and the Normandy campaign and the autumn's defensive fighting along the Siegfried Line, whose specific and accumulated cost has reduced most German line divisions to formations whose paper strength and combat strength have been diverging since Normandy. The 2nd Panzer is one of the Wehrmacht's most experienced armored divisions, a formation that has fought from France in 1940 through North Africa and the Eastern Front, rebuilt and re-equipped for this offensive with Panther tanks and veteran crews whose experience includes the specific and hard-won knowledge of what the Allied tank destroyer and air power combination does to unsupported armor. The Panzer Lehr is an elite formation whose original composition from the demonstration and training units of the German Army's schools has preserved a technical and tactical quality above the standard line division. Bayerline's soldiers are among the best trained in the German army in December 1944. The 26th Volksgrenadier has been rebuilt after its Eastern Front destruction and is led by Kokott, whose aggressive and capable management of his division will be demonstrated in the Bastogne perimeter attacks, whose failure is not primarily Kokott's failure, but the XLV Corps' structural failure of giving him one division and a single attached battalion against an American airborne division. What these three formations collectively lack is time. What they individually lack is the road through Bastogne. And what stands between them and the road is the 101st Airborne Division, which arrived in Bastogne on December 18th, in the specific and fortunate timing of the operational accident, whose consequence is the accident that stops the German offensive's western axis. The near failure of the German Ardennes offensive's central axis is not, in the conventional military history's framing, presented primarily as a logistical problem. It is presented as a tactical problem. The 101st Airborne's defensive tenacity against the odds, the German failure to assault the Bastogne perimeter with sufficient force before the American garrison consolidated its positions in the first 24 hours, the specific and documented German tactical command decisions of December 19 and 20 that committed only the 26th Volksgrenadier to the Bastogne assault, while leaving the 2nd Panzer and Panzer Lehr to bypass to the north and south. Decisions that left Bastogne invested by infantry, whose firepower was insufficient to reduce the American perimeter, before McAuliffe's soldiers could organize it into the coherent circular defense that the siege's 10 days will demonstrate as one of the most effective small unit defensive performances in the American Army's history. Both framings are correct as far as they go, and both are necessary for the complete understanding of the Bastogne battle's place in the Ardennes campaign's history. The tactical failure is real, and it is documented in the 26th Volksgrenadiers after-action reports, and the XLV Corps' war diary, and the American divisional accounts of the December 19 through 23 assault repulses. But behind the tactical failure is the logistical failure whose nature the Ardennes battlefield's road network makes the structural condition of the entire German offensive's western axis. 2 Panzer Brigades needed the same road at the same time. Neither could receive adequate supply through that road until Bastogne was cleared, and Bastogne was never cleared. The question, on the morning of December 18, 1944, as the 101st Airborne's lead elements are arriving in Bastogne from their overnight truck convoy from Reims, and as General McAuliffe is establishing his command post in the town's Belgian barracks building, and his regimental commanders are pushing their battalions out onto the roads leading east and north to delay the German advance, is whether the German command can take Bastogne fast enough to keep the armored columns moving before the American garrison consolidates its defensive positions into the circular perimeter whose coherence will make the assault increasingly costly, or whether the crossroads that the entire 5th Panzer Army's western axis depends on will become the stone in the German throat that chokes the advance to death while the Allied command assembles the reserve that will counterattack. December 18th, 1944. The XLVI Panzer Corps' advance is already experiencing the road congestion that the Ardennes highway network's character produces when 3 divisions are attempting to move through the same limited number of paved routes simultaneously, experiencing it in the specific and operational way of the armored column commander who watches the march rate drop from the planned 15 km per hour to the achieved 5 km per hour. Because the vehicle density on the available roads has reached the saturation point, beyond which the column moves at the pace of its slowest element. The 2nd Panzer Division's tank columns are on the N12 road northwest of Bastogne, moving toward the Orth River crossing at Ortheville, but the route is already congested with the rearward elements of the 26th Volksgrenadiers' horse-drawn artillery and supply columns whose pace is the pace of the horse in December mud, 4 km per hour on the straightaway, less on the grades and the curves, and stopped entirely when the horse-drawn gun, whose wheel has sunk into the road's shoulder, has to be man-handled back onto the pavement, while the Panther tank column behind it waits in the December cold. The Panzer Lehr Division's columns are south of Bastogne on the N84, competing for road space with the 26th Volksgrenadier Division's infantry, whose foot movement and horse-drawn artillery impose the slowest rate of march on the column, and whose presence in the road network creates the specific and operational friction of the mixed mechanized and unmechanized formation, sharing the same road in the same direction at the same time. General von Lüttwitz arrives at his decision on December 18th with the specific and professional urgency of the Corps commander, who understands that every hour spent assembling the force to assault Bastogne is an hour the Meuse crossing is not being reached, and an hour the Allied command is using to assemble the reserve that will seal the breach. The order he issues on December 18th will define the battle's character for the next 15 days. Bastogne must be taken. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division under Cocotte, with the attached 115th Panzer Battalion and its Stug 3 assault guns, will assault the town from the east and the south, while the 2nd Panzer Division bypasses to the north on the N4 toward Noville and the Arth River crossings, and the Panzer Lehr bypasses to the south on the N84 toward Cibret and Saint-Hubert, both divisions continuing the westward advance toward the Meuse, while Cocotte's infantry reduces the Bastogne garrison. The bypass decision is the decision that will lose the offensive. The Corps commander makes it because the alternative, stopping 2 armored divisions to assault a crossroads town, is the decision that loses the timetable. The German command is choosing between 2 ways to fail, and it chooses the faster way. This decision, to bypass rather than concentrate, is the decision that the offensive's timetable requires, and that the operational outcome will reveal as the decision that determines the offensive's failure in its most fundamental structural form. You cannot bypass a crossroads that controls the roads you are using. You cannot split your corps around a defended point and expect both halves to maintain their operational momentum when the supply columns for both halves must pass through or near the defended point, whose defenders can interdict any road within range of their artillery. You cannot conduct a deep armored exploitation when the supply route for the exploitation is blocked by the garrison at the crossroads that your bypass decision has left in place and invested but not captured. Von Lüttwitz knows this, knows it with the professional certainty of the Corps commander who has been studying the Ardennes road network since the planning phase, and who understands that Bastogne's road junction is the operational requirement whose fulfillment the Corps' advance requires. He makes the bypass decision anyway because the alternative, concentrating the Corps for the deliberate assault of Bastogne with the full weight of the 2nd Panzer and Panzer Lehr rather than only the 26th Volksgrenadier, costs the 48 to 72 hours that the offensive's timetable cannot absorb. December 19th, 1944. The road congestion around Bastogne is becoming the operational catastrophe that the bypass decision's logic was supposed to prevent by keeping the armored divisions moving while the infantry invested the town. The 2nd Panzer Division's advance to the northwest has outrun its supply columns whose route from the German line of departure, from the west wall through the Schnee Eifel and across the Au River, through Bastogne's northern outskirts, is being contested by the 101st Airborne's defensive positions that General McAuliffe's soldiers have been establishing since their December 18 arrival in the specific and organized way of the American Airborne Division, whose training has produced the defensive competence that the Bastogne perimeter's establishment requires. The Panzer Lehr Division's bypass to the south has moved General Bayerlein's division through Cibret and Tillet towards Saint-Hubert, where Bayerlein's spearhead arrives on December 19th, but the supply route for Panzer Lehr is the same N84, whose southern segment the 26th Volksgrenadier is using as the approach route for its assault on Bastogne's southern perimeter, and whose northern segment runs through the Bastogne crossroads that is not clear. The XLVI Corps' support elements, the fuel trucks, the ammunition convoys, the replacement columns, are attempting to use the N84 for the resupply of both the bypassing divisions and the investing force simultaneously, which is the specific and operational impossibility of a single road serving the supply needs of 3 divisions, whose directions of movement have been split by the bypass decision. The N84 becomes on December 19, and in the days that follow, a traffic jam of military vehicles whose operational effect is the operational effect of the blocked artery. Everything behind the block stops moving. And what stops moving in an armored offensive, whose entire operational concept is built on maintaining the momentum of the spearhead before the defense can reconstitute, is not just inconvenient, but fatal to the operation's design. The German operational concept for Wacht am Rhein requires the armored spearhead to be moving west at the rate that the supply system can sustain through the advancing road network. When the road network is blocked at Bastogne, the supply system cannot sustain the spearhead, and the spearhead cannot maintain the rate that the operational concept requires. The specific and visceral reality of the N84 congestion on December 19 is the reality of vehicles stopped bumper to bumper on a narrow Belgian road in the December dark. The Panzer IV and Panther tank engines running to keep the crews warm because the December temperature in the Ardennes is below freezing, and the tank without its engine running is the tank that kills its crew with cold. The precious fuel being consumed in idling rather than movement, the supply trucks and the artillery prime movers, and the staff cars, all wedged into the same narrow road, whose shoulders are soft mud that will swallow any vehicle that attempts to pull off the pavement. The crews cannot sleep, and cannot move, and cannot see ahead through the column to where the blockage begins. They can hear the artillery from the Bastogne perimeter in the east, the rolling sound of the 26th Volksgrenadiers assault on the 101st Airborne's positions, the sharper crack of the American artillery, whose sound tells the halted crews that the crossroads that should have been cleared on December 18 is still being contested and will not be available to the supply convoy today. General von Lüttwitz is on the radio to both his division commanders and to Army headquarters with the same message. The road through Bastogne is blocked. The supply convoys cannot reach the forward divisions, and the bypass that was supposed to keep the offensive moving has instead produced the operational result of 2 armored divisions advancing beyond their supply system's reach, while a reinforced infantry division bleeds itself against the American garrison. Something must be done about Bastogne. The Army headquarters responds with the message that the offensive's timetable produces. Keep moving west. Bastogne will fall when the garrison realizes it is isolated. The garrison does not fall. The garrison's commanding general, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, of the 101st Airborne, receives the formal surrender demand on December 22, a document delivered under a white flag by German officers who walk into the American lines at 11:50 hours, with the formal demand that invites McAuliffe to avoid further useless bloodshed by surrendering the Bastogne garrison to the German forces surrounding it. McAuliffe reads it. According to the accounts of the officers present in the command post, he laughs. He responds with a single typewritten word, nuts, which the German officers who receive his reply cannot translate precisely, and which the American liaison officer, the road remains blocked. The near failure of the German logistical plan, the failure that is not the near failure of the operation that almost succeeded, but the actual failure of the operation that the structural problem of the blocked road produced, arrives in its most concentrated and most irreversible form on December 20th, 21, and the days that follow. When the 2nd Panzer Division's spearhead under Colonel von Laukert reaches the Orthe River crossing at Ortheville and then Tenneville, and then drives northwest through the Ardennes terrain toward the Meuse at Dinant, reaches the culminating point of the German advance's western extent, the point where the 2nd Panzer's reconnaissance elements will come within 4 miles of the Meuse River on December 24th, before the fuel runs out and the advance stops, while simultaneously, 25 miles to the southeast, the 26th Volksgrenadier Division under General Heinz Kokott is battering itself against the 101st Airborne's increasingly organized perimeter in the specific and costly assault battles of December 19 through 23 that produce the German casualties, whose replacement requires the road that is blocked, and consume the German ammunition whose resupply requires the road that is blocked. The 2nd Panzer's spearhead on December 24 has fuel for perhaps 25 kilometers more of advance. It is 4 miles from the Meuse. The reconnaissance elements can see the river from the ridgeline. Between the 2nd Panzer and the fuel that would take it to the Meuse, and across is the road through Bastogne. blocked by McAuliffe's garrison, blocked by the 26th Volksgrenadiers' inability to clear it, blocked by the structural failure of the bypass decision. Between the 2nd Panzer and the reinforcement that might hold its cell's position against the 2nd Armored Division counterattack, organizing to the north, is the road through Bastogne, blocked. The 2nd Panzer Division's spearhead at Celles is destroyed on December 26 by the American 2nd Armored Division under General Ernest Harmon in the specific and total destruction of the isolated armored force whose isolation the Bastogne bottleneck produced by keeping the fuel at Bastogne instead of moving it forward to Celles, produced by the blocked road that prevented the resupply convoy from reaching the spearhead before its tanks ran dry. The destruction at Celles accounts for 88 tanks and assault guns destroyed or captured, 2,500 soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. The westernmost point of the German Ardennes advance turned into the graveyard of the offensive's best armored formation in the snow and the frozen mud of the Belgian countryside, 3 miles from the river that was the offensive's objective. In the snow of the Celles pocket, where the German tank crews of the 2nd Panzer Division's spearhead died beside their motionless Panther and Panzer IV tanks in the December cold, and the 2nd Armored Division's Shermans and M10 tank destroyers swept through the fuel-dry German positions in the specific and total destruction of the isolated armored force that the Bastogne bottleneck's supply failure had left without fuel and without support. The operational consequence of the road through Bastogne that the German command never cleared is recorded in the most visceral and irreversible terms available to the historian of the lost battle. 88 tanks and assault guns, 2,500 soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. The westernmost point of the German Ardennes offensive's advance, a point measured not in the kilometers to the Meuse, but in the fuel liters that the blocked road never delivered, the road that wasn't cleared. The legacy of the 2 Panzer Brigades and the one road that neither could use freely enough to maintain the offensive's momentum is the legacy of the Ardennes offensive's structural failure, a failure that is not primarily a tactical failure of the assault on Bastogne, though the tactical failure is real and documented in the 26 Volksgrenadiers after-action reports, and not primarily a strategic failure of the offensive's plan, though the strategic overreach of the Antwerp objective was apparent to von Manteuffel and Bayerlein and the other German commanders who were ordered to pursue it and who said so in the pre-offensive planning conferences. It is primarily a logistical failure, the failure of the road network's capacity to support the operational concept, the German supply system's vulnerability to the disruption that the single blocked crossroads produces, and the decision to bypass rather than clear the crossroads town whose possession controlled the roads that the entire offensive's western axis required to function. The ex-LVI Panzer Corps' operational record for the period December 18 through December 26 documents the road congestion with the specific and professional precision of the German staff officer, whose after-action reporting is among the most detailed and most honest in the Wehrmacht's institutional archive. The N84 blockage, beginning December 19, the fuel shortfalls reported by the 2nd Panzer's spearhead on December 21 and December 23, the supply convoys that turned back from the Bastogne approaches because the road through Bastogne was not clear and the alternative routes were not passable for the fuel truck in December mud. The ammunition expenditure at the Bastogne perimeter whose replenishment the blocked road prevented and whose deficit forced Cocotte to ration the 26 Volksgrenadiers artillery fire during the December 22 and 23 assault attempts. The operational record is the record of the army that needed the road and never got it. The record of the offensive that failed not at the Meuse, but at the crossroads. The 101st Airborne Division's casualties in the Bastogne defense, approximately 2,000 killed, wounded, and missing through January 3, 1945, when the 11th Armored Division's arrival relieved the garrison, are the casualties of the unit that held the road junction. They are also, in the operational calculus of the Ardennes campaign, the casualties whose cost was the offensive's defeat in its most direct and causal form. The 101st Airborne's approximately 18,000 soldiers who defended the Bastogne perimeter from December 18th through the relief on December 26, and through the continued defensive fighting into the first week of January, represent the unit that converted the logistical bottleneck into the operational defeat, that held the crossroads whose possession the German offensive required, held it against the 26th Volksgrenadiers' assault and the artillery fire, and the isolation that the December 21 encirclement produced, and the supply shortage that the isolation's 14 days accumulated, and held it for the 6 days that Patton's Third Corps required to drive from Ardennes to Assenois and punch the corridor through the 5th Parachute Division's blocking position. Every day the 101st Airborne held Bastogne was a day the XLVI Panzer Corps' western advance was logistically strangled. A day the 2nd Panzer's spearhead consumed its fuel in place rather than advancing. A day the supply convoy sat on the N-84 rather than moving. Every German soldier who died assaulting the Bastogne perimeter in the assault battles of December 19 through 23 was a soldier who was not pursuing the advance to the Meuse, whose capture was the offensive's objective. Every German 105mm artillery round fired at the Bastogne perimeter was a round that the 26th Volksgrenadiers artillery could not fire at the American armor that was assembling to the north and west for the counterattack that would destroy the 2nd Panzer's spearhead at Celles. The arithmetic of the Bastogne bottleneck is the arithmetic of the offensive's defeat. The German command needed Bastogne by December 19s, at the latest, to keep the supply route to the bypassing divisions open, and to prevent the Allied command from using the blocked crossroads as the pivot for the counteroffensive. The German command did not have Bastogne on December 19s, or December 20, or December 26, or January 3. Every day of that 16-day delay was a day the Allied command used to assemble the reserve, the 82nd Airborne Division under General Ridgway at Manhay on the northern shoulder, the 2nd Armored Division under General Harmon at Celles blocking the 2nd Panzer's advance. Patton's Third Corps driving north to punch the corridor to Bastogne on December 26. That destroyed the German advance's remnant and ended the last German offensive on the Western Front. The war in Europe ended in May 1945, and it ended with the Allied armies across the Rhine and into the German heartland, in the advance that the Ardennes offensive was designed to prevent, by splitting the Allied armies and forcing a negotiated settlement before the Allied armies could reach the Rhine. It ended this way because the offensive failed at its operational foundation, failed at the road junction where the 7 roads converge, failed at the crossroads in the Belgian plateau that the German command needed cleared by December 19 and never cleared, failed because the bypass decision that seemed to preserve the offensive's momentum actually destroyed it by leaving the supply route in the hands of the garrison it bypassed. It ended this way because 2 Panzer Brigades needed the same road at the same time, and a division of American paratroopers who arrived in Bastogne in open trucks without their winter gear on December 18 stood in the middle of it and refused to move, and the German command never found a way around the problem that the soldier with the rifle in the frozen Belgian perimeter represented, which is the way wars have always been decided, not by the plan that was bold enough to conceive the decisive maneuver, and not by the logistician who calculated the road network's capacity correctly, and not by the commander who argued against the objective that was too ambitious, but by the soldier who was tough enough to stand in the road and block it, in the frozen Belgian December, for exactly as long as it needed to be blocked.